Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started probably in about a minute or so. I can see folks are joining the Zoom now. So sit tight and we'll get started in about a minute. Maybe we'll kick off. Actually, this is a fun one we always do. We'll kick off with where everyone is dialing in from. So Noel, why don't you tell us first where you're dialing in from?
I am in surprisingly sunny Portland, Oregon.
Love that. I am in, this is not a background as Noel asked me, I'm in San Francisco in a tall building in downtown and we're having a lovely day here. So also sunny. We got Raleigh, we got Philly. We have San Francisco. That is my coworker Claire, who's in the same office as I am.
You got a Chiefs fan in the audience.
Ah, there we go. This is gonna upset that Chiefs fan. My extent of Chiefs knowledge is surrounded by Taylor Swift now, unfortunately.
Well, my son just got the Travis Kelce haircut for high school graduation tomorrow, so maybe that will make them feel good.
There you go. All right. Okay, well, I see we have kind of a quorum now, so feel free to keep putting in the chat where you're calling in from. Love to see the wide mix of folks. And Noel and I will get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, whether it's morning, afternoon, or I think we do have some folks who are planning to dial in from the UK, so evening for you all. We are excited to talk to you about aligning sustainability with your business goals. Super quick introduction from me. My name's Kristen Ribeiro. I'm the VP of Marketing at Green Places. I am fairly new to this space. I joined the company about 4 months ago. And so I think that while you have Noel, who will introduce himself in a second on one side, who is clearly why you all are here and the subject matter expertise, some of you may not be as far down your journey in understanding sustainability, ESG. And so hopefully I can help share that perspective with you and find a middle ground for everyone to take something tangible away from today's discussion. Okay, with that, Noel, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Noel Kinder, recently retired after 25 years at Nike. It's kind of strange to even utter that sentence, having spent half my life in the same corporate ecosystem. A little bit of a mutt from a career standpoint. Ended my career at Nike as Chief Sustainability Officer. Had spent a couple of years leading responsible supply chain as well, but spent a lot of time in the operations space, 3 years in Vietnam as general manager of manufacturing there, led the apparel sourcing and supply planning team, some finance, some strategy, a little bit of everything, hence the mutt term. But really happy to be here with you, Kristen, and really excited to continue to work with Green Places.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to get into our fireside chat here in just a second, but I think just to set a little context, and if you've been on a Green Places webinar before, you may have heard this before, but I think for those who haven't, it's a good just baseline to kind of get us all on the same page. I think as you all know, and certainly Noel, as you know, sustainability is a requirement right now. It's not like, if we will do this, it's really about when and how at this point. And that's for everyone. So obviously, Noel's coming to you from the perspective of a large company, but it's not just the Fortune 500. Y'all are getting that pressure, and probably why you're on this webinar across investors, across clients, across employees too. And I think that or at least where we see, our sort of role is there's oftentimes you have a sustainability team practice, what Noel has built at these large companies. And then, the rest of companies that aren't that size don't often have the resources to do so. And that's really where we, as Green Places, sort of feel like we can fit in and help. I'm not going to go through this, but if you want data points and things to help with your leadership, understanding why sustainability needs to be a focus right now, and Noel will certainly talk through a bunch of that. I feel like this is take a screenshot of this slide. There's a lot of data points here. I mean, I think the first one, I won't read it all. Like I said, the first one is just like, hey, most of the CEOs in the US have this embedded in their org, and that is for a reason. You know, that is not just because the requirement, but really around the value creation from doing so. So I think it's always just helpful to kind of set the context here. And again, we will send this out after if you didn't get a chance to take the screenshot. Okay, so before we dive in with Noel, we're gonna pop open a quick poll here and just get a sense of where you all are finding your challenges. So hopefully you can see that that poll on the screen. There we go. We're getting some answers now. What's your biggest challenge in aligning sustainability with your business goals? So take a second, fill that out. Is it leadership buy-in? Is it resourcing, the expertise surrounding it, navigating the regulations, or measuring and reporting on impact? And I'm sure that there are more than one challenges that you have here, but tell us the biggest one for you right now.
Yeah, my guess is that if you had a all of the above button, that would be the number one response.
Right, and that we should have put that, but we want a little direction here. Okay, let's see. Let me share these results with y'all. Unsurprisingly, I'm seeing leadership as number one. Noel, what are your thoughts to our responses here?
Yeah, I think that that's pretty common, right? Sustainability has been for a long time, even at companies like Nike or even some of our competitors, largely aspirational. And we're at an inflection point where it's going from an aspiration and an intention to do the right thing to very much a need to, often driven by regulation, to show your homework, if you will, to be rigorous in how things are reported, to be realistic in the aspirations and the goals that you put out into the world. And so getting leadership to come along on the journey of that transition is super important. And it's a big change. We had conversations when I was still at Nike that the regulatory regimes that companies are facing now is probably second only to Sarbanes-Oxley, if anybody on the call is old enough to even remember that, which was a massive regulatory change in the US from a reporting standpoint. So it's a big deal. And it doesn't surprise me that there are some leadership teams that still haven't quite grasped the magnitude of the change.
Yep, absolutely. And very obviously relevant to what we'll be talking about today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing. Let's see. Okay. So let's dig in here. Y'all are here to you know, kind of pick Noel's brain, hear about his hard-won lessons, excuse me, and really try and take that and apply it to your organizations. So Noel, you talked to us a little bit about your career, 25 years at Nike, which is amazing, across many different roles. How do you think that experience, you know, across working in planning, finance, strategy shaped your approach to driving sustainability at Nike, which is, you know, I would say arguably one of the most well-known sustainable brands out there?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to hear you say that. That was always the goal. You know, look, I think one of the things, to be concise, that I really tried to identify was the intersection of incentive. And that sounds a bit cliche, but when you're really trying to drive change, you're looking for those places where the change that you're trying to drive, the strategy that you're trying to drive as an individual leader, intersects with what somebody else is trying to do, whether that's a planning leader, an operations leader, a manufacturing leader. And one of the benefits of sustainability, just in terms of finding those intersections, is that the more efficient you become, the more sustainable you are, right? It's not rocket science to say that if you consume fewer resources, you're more efficient with the way that you plan, the more efficient the way you run your operations, you're going to have a lower carbon footprint, you're going to create less waste. And so I think for anybody starting the sustainability journey, that's a really good place to start, because I think, you know, for a long time, and I said this before, sustainability was aspirational, right? It was the right thing to do, and it unquestionably is, but it's becoming the expectations are much more rigorous now in terms of how you set goals, how those goals are realized, how you report on those goals, whether it's regulatory frameworks or investor expectations. And so it's a grown-up function now, for lack of a better description. And I think understanding what your peers are trying to accomplish and how what you're trying to drive coincides with what they're trying to drive, and find those places where you can work together that's really how you start to get that momentum going, that flywheel starts to turn, and people see the value in sustainability being as much about business resilience and efficiency as anything else.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. What, like in those early days at Nike, you know, with you taking on the helm of sustainability, like what was the state of sustainability at Nike? And then what were some of the maybe hard conversations you had to have with your business leaders in order to level it up?
Yeah, well, I was really fortunate. I took over after a woman named Hannah Jones, who was an icon in corporate responsibility, had been CSO for almost 20 years. So I took over after a really strong foundation had been set over multiple decades. But it's still a challenge, right? And the biggest challenge is just finding that space in the prioritization. There's one conversation that I recall with a very senior leader who said, look, we've got a million things to do every season in the product creation space. And sustainability is about 1.3 million on the list. And needless to say, I was a little deflated at the beginning of that conversation. But we really kind of talked through what is the intersection of incentive? Where is what I'm trying to do as a sustainability leader? Where does that intersect with what you're trying to do? And in the product creation space, it's really about waste. You know, so if you're a product company, anything you leave on the cutting room floor, to use a footwear or an apparel analogy, is ultimately lost margin. And so if you can focus there, then you're not asking product teams to do above and beyond what they're already strapped to do. I mean, so in that poll, lots of people mentioned low budget, fewer resources than they think they need. You know, of course, everybody always feels that way all the time. I certainly did. But if you can find those places where sustainability just becomes part of the rhythm of how people do things, then it makes it much easier to actually start to accomplish those goals. Then you can layer in the performance management aspect of it. If you have performance management, then you have the reporting capability built in. And you start to just make it part of the rhythm of the way that the business operates. I'm making it sound super simple. Of course it's not, right? Having the tools available to do that reporting, have the performance management built into the process, that takes some change management, and it takes some gravitas from a leadership standpoint to drive that. But I think, you know, continuing to find those places where you're on the same page and you're trying to accomplish the same thing from a slightly different angle helps. I will say that's not always easy, right? There are going to be decisions in the sustainability space that maybe cost a little more, or require a little bit of innovation, or require you to tell a little bit different brand story. And everybody knows who's in a position of driving change, that takes some effort, right? Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it takes some influencing capability. So I don't want to oversimplify it, because I know there are people on the call who live the challenges every day.
Totally, totally. I mean, I think, you know, if we move outside of like product company, I think about some of our customers who are in software and technology, and, you know, if they're going up, if y'all on the line are going up in an RFP situation, you have a competitive situation, this is starting to become a question in those RFPs. And so when I think about getting leadership buy-in, you know, and I do this in my own career, is like, if I can align myself with the head of sales, and, you know, to do one or another thing, but specifically here with sustainability, I think that's a really good partner to have on your side as you all are thinking through, you know, how you get that buy-in at the leadership level.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really important point, that there are the expectations are mounting every single day. And those expectations cascade down, right? If you're not a Nike or a Walmart or a Target, or somebody who has resources and the level of sophistication and some history in working the sustainability space and reporting on it, it's a lot harder when those companies who you may be a vendor for come to you and ask you to start to support their own reporting capability. And so, you know, getting to the point where you have the fundamental resources to support your customers in from a reporting standpoint, is really, really important, because those expectations may seem overwhelming at first, but they're coming really, really quickly. And so you have to be prepared, because your customers are going to be asking you for this, like you said, in an RFP, or even just to support that customer's own impact report, which often we'll do every year. So I think that's a kind of a looming, if not already in place, factor in how people will handle this going forward.
Totally, totally. I mean, we have so many folks that we're talking to who are in that, you know, essentially scope 3 supply chain for big companies like Microsoft, Walmart, et cetera. So I think, you know, the pressure is very clear there, and it is to be, you know, basically for their clients, you know, carbon footprint. Like, they need to understand their own to be able to have their clients understand their total carbon emissions.
Yeah, that's right. And that is a daunting task, right? You know, if you don't have any resources, you're being asked by a customer to do that to support their own reporting regime. It's really easy to get overwhelmed for it. So you're looking for things that make it easy where you don't have to develop an organization, throw a bunch of resources at it, create a CSO. Because for a lot of organizations, that level of resourcing is not really appropriate, right? You want to do the baseline, you're just starting the journey. You probably haven't even figured out kind of what you stand for philosophically in this space, yet you're being asked to report on your carbon footprint. So it's a tricky space right now.
Totally, totally. Let's see, if you were kind of like writing out a roadmap of like, here's what you need to do at when you need to start to build a sustainability, like not team, but practice internally, who would you identify as like, these are the folks that you should talk to right now if you're not already talking to them?
I mean, honestly, your finance and legal teams. I mean,
Yeah.
just because the regulatory regimes have come on so quickly, whether it's what's happening in Europe with CSRD, you have more specific regimes like the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which will likely be the template for the EU more broadly, California's reporting regime. I think those that feel like the SEC is going to put their regime on ice, maybe, but you probably want to get prepared for it already. And really that comes down to the controlling team, the broader finance team, so your CFO and the legal team, because they're the ones who generally are responsible for processes and controls and the reporting that comes out of them. So it's interesting. You hear this a lot from CSOs, if you pay attention to any of them on LinkedIn, say, cozy up to your CFO. I think that's really true.
Yeah.
And I also think, again, if you're a product company, your chief supply chain officer is a huge ally. And when I first started the role of CSO at Nike, I reported to the COO. And that was really intentional because operations, particularly for a product company, represents the biggest carbon footprint. And so I think you want to have relationships with the folks who manage the reporting and the legal aspects of that, and also the people who really are pulling the levers that drive your carbon footprint.
Totally makes sense. And I really do think that cuts across industry, like having that relationship across any industry with your CFO and your legal team. That's going to apply to any of the folks who are on the line today, law firms included. I think we see that as like very common throughout. One thing we talk about, Noel, what you and I have talked about a lot, I know sort of our leadership team talks about it a lot, is having the trust and credibility. And I think as you described it, it's like aligning with incentives with those business leaders. Are there other, strategies and approaches that you found useful to working with folks in those roles, your CFO, your GC, to really help them see you as a trusted leader and advisor in this space?
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, part of why I say understanding the intersections of incentives, what's implied in that is that you understand what their jobs are, right? Mm-hmm. You're enough of a sponge to say, okay, well, if I'm the CFO, what do I really care about? And how do I use that understanding of what they're tasked with doing to help drive what I'm tasked with doing? And so what I have found is that the more you understand the upstream and downstream impacts of the functions you're trying to work with, the more you're able to drive change. Because there's often, I think when folks, the single biggest mistake we all make when we try to drive change is to just drive the change without really kind of taking a moment to say, okay, for example, in my case, many jobs ago, I was in there driving change in a inventory planning space without really taking the time to understand what my peers across the table were really facing. And through a couple of missteps and some difficult conversations, I finally went, okay, I'm going to take the time to actually understand what pressures they're under. What are the things they're trying to deliver? Because once you do that, not only are you more empathetic to their situation, but you're much more informed about what it takes to actually drive change together.
Totally. I mean, good tip for all of us in our life too. Let's all have some empathy for what other folks are dealing with. But I totally agree. I think, I'll just give the personal example here is one of my coworkers, Claire, who's on our sales team, is literally outside of this door. And I work with our sales team on a lot of stuff that pertains to like their job and them doing things. There she is in the chat. And I think, it's one thing for me to come in and just be like, hey, Claire, go do this because I said so, versus like, okay, let me understand, where are you having challenges? What do you think, your customers would benefit from? Like, should we create some content that's specific to that? So that totally rings true with me and sort of how I approach working with our teams here at Green Places.
Well, and maybe the dumb review of what you just said is you start by asking questions. How do you learn about what they're really going through so that you can work together, right? Versus, hey, I need you to go do this. That's a very different approach.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so just shifting a tiny bit here, Noel. So with the evolving, regulatory landscape, I know you mentioned what people may or may not be thinking about the SEC. What do you think, with that in mind, but also with state legislation and the legislation in the EU, which I think hopefully we can use as a good model for us in the States now? What do you think companies should be doing in order to prepare for 2026 or whatever, the date winds up being?
Yeah, I mean, 2026, that date is kind of scary, right? Because it's right around the corner. And often what needs to happen is a significant period of preparation before you actually go live, right? So if you're starting to think about it now, it's almost already too late. Look, I think my approach in the sustainability space kind of took multiple facets. I mean, first and foremost, you have to know what you want to stand for. And that may be really aspirational. We want to lead our industry. We want to be number one. We want to have science-based targets, whatever it may be, or maybe it's less aspirational than that. But I think you have to have alignment across the company as to what everybody's signing up for. And just because you're not aspirational doesn't mean you're a good company. Maybe you start more conservatively, especially if you have to report on it. I think you have to have executive buy-in on that. If you have a board of directors, the board of directors needs to be bought in. I had to report to one of the committees on Nike's board every quarter on how we were doing with respect to certain aspects of our sustainability strategy. So the governance component is really important. Having clear and specific goals, are they quantitative, not just aspirational, not we're going to do better, but we're going to do X by Y. I think that begins to operationalize the sustainability strategy and make it real. Got to have a performance management regime. Okay, if we said we're going to do X by Y, what are we looking at every quarter to make sure that we're making progress toward that? And if we're not, what do we need to change? And then the reporting capability to support that, right? Because these are effectively equivalent to financial reports that you put out into the world. And so some combination of those things, I think, are table stakes anymore. And again, aspiration, you can toggle up and down based on your capability, based on what kind of company you are. But the baseline expectation is that you can report on what you're doing. And that's a really different expectation than it has been for the previous decades when sustainability was just emerging as a topic. To be able to say, here's our carbon footprint, here's our waste footprint, whatever it may be for you, to be able to do that with a level of rigor and that will comply with a level of assurance expected in the state of California or the European Union or wherever it may be. That's a really different expectation. And it may mean that you start more conservative because that's where you are in your maturity curve, and that's okay. But the fundamental expectation is that ability to report on it.
Yeah, totally agree. Of course, we agree, being in the space that we're in. I want to touch on one thing. So you mentioned the performance management piece of that. Is that, curious at Nike, and then what just your general opinion of this is like, was that your team that held your team accountable? Did Nike have a larger performance management function? And then what do you think, in a lot of the cases, the folks who are on the line don't have these big teams to support, as I mentioned in the beginning, like, who holds the accountability flag in their case?
Well, I think it goes back to that notion of intersection of incentive, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if you're really going to be good at performance management, you're doing that with your functional partners. So whether you have a supply chain leader or a general counsel or whoever it may be, that once you have those quantitative goals and we say, we're going to do X by Y, even if it's not particularly aspirational, that you're able to kind of track what it's going to take for you to get there. And that the people at the table who actually can help control those outcomes are the ones that are helping own it. I think for a long time, sustainability was in a position where they were, wagging the angry finger, hoping that the business would do what they needed to do in order to achieve those goals. But because the reporting expectations are so much higher now than they ever have been before, you really need everybody's participation. And so what I would say by performance management is, again, my frame of reference is a product company, but it could be a SaaS company, it could be anything, where you say, okay, here's our goal. here are the functions that need to do these things in order for us to achieve this goal. And we're going to sit down collectively once a quarter as part of a general operations review. I wouldn't advocate for a specific sustainability review and say, okay, in our case, when I was at Nike, the chief supply chain officer would say, here's our cost per unit, here's how we're doing on delivery times, here's our carbon footprint over the last quarter. That's really powerful, that you have a functional leader who's taking responsibility for their piece of what you've committed to as a company and reporting it out to those the powers that be in service of the broader aspiration that you have as a company. And of course, the sustainability team's there to help support, to give subject matter expertise, to drive the overall strategy. But at the end of the day, sustainability is an enterprise-wide thing. And so you need the enterprise to engage in that performance management aspect. And I would say just piggyback on what you already have. Don't create something new. Nobody else wants another meeting or another committee or another steering committee. Become part of the regular rhythm of business, as I said before, because once you're into the fabric of the business, it's just normal, right? It's not another thing. It's not an elective. It is just what you do.
Totally. And I mean, I think even at our stage of company, we're not there quite yet, but like every leader has a P&L essentially, and understanding their team's carbon footprint, their emissions, and having a plan to reduce that. Obviously, we have that at the company level, but even going deeper, like that is what we envision our own company to have. I think, all of those folks on the line will also get to that point too, where it truly is. It's like, hey, your VP of sales is sending people around to go talk to customers, prospects. Like that is part of what they report on, in terms of monthly revenue, spend, all that stuff. It's kind of, I think we both envision it. It's just becoming part of like your business intelligence.
Yeah. And I think everybody on the call, if you work in the sustainability space, knows that that integrated approach is becoming an expectation for prospective employees, right? They want to know that you care about it. They want to know that it's not just some corporate talking point. They want to know that it's more than just a note in the impact report. They want to know that you actually care about this and that you're doing something about it. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to have a point of view. Totally.
I feel the same about, looking at or prospective employees looking at the diversity of a company too. It's like, this is table stakes at this point. And so I feel like sustainability is kind of like the next thing that that DEI has charged up within employers and really doing the right thing over the last 20 years. So I guess maybe shifting a little bit here, Noel, thinking through again, there's the big companies, big resources, and maybe smaller companies, not so many resources. Sometimes even maybe there's one person on the call and that is the sustainability team. What are some of the ways with that understanding, one person side of desk at times, like what are some of the ways that they can inspire action and change within their organization? I know you've given us some great talking points for aligning with leaders and business incentives, but thinking through, like other ways that folks can drive action.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of repeating myself, it's really about making it easy. At the end of the day, if you're a change agent, you want to make that change as seamless as possible. And so, whether that's finding a reporting capability that is not, some big massive enterprise lift, you want things to be easy for the enterprise to metabolize, however big that enterprise might be. And I think a lot of it has to do with your approach. And if your approach is equal parts inspiration, right? This is a subject that a lot of people have a lot of passion around, justifiably so, but tempered with pragmatism and an understanding of the overall needs of the business and the overall goals of the business and understanding how to fit into that. I really believe that we're at a stage now with all of the changes in expectations from all of the stakeholders in this space, including regulators, that we're moving from aspirational to pragmatic. And I think that will require sustainability professionals to have both. And I think that they will be welcome more so now than they ever have been if they use that approach. It won't be easy, right? Because this will always feel a little bit like an elective. And regulations, frankly, let's be honest, most industries don't want to be regulated. But I think if you can be someone who provides solutions, then you have a much greater chance of achieving the things that you want to as a sustainability professional.
Totally, totally. And I just think also like there's so much room for sharing here, you know, where there is often only one person in a company. I'm sure that gets lonely. You know, I've been in that role when I'm the only person in a function. So I just think, you know, there's so much room for best practice sharing, for challenge sharing, whether it's in formats like this, or I know, you know, our customers will get together at times and do local things. So I think just like having that, let me take what you've done and copy paste it in here. Like we all don't need to reinvent the wheel here.
Absolutely. No, it's a great point, Kristen. I think that's, I was really fortunate to, and still do have great relationships with a lot of my peers and former peers at a number of other companies in a number of different industries. And you're right, this is largely a pre-competitive space. And so, you know, you're not going to compete with one of your direct competitors on who has the better sustainability report. At the end of the day, we're all trying to do the right thing, and we're all in a space where regulators are expecting a more even playing field. So absolutely learn from your peers. Guarantee they've gone through some of the same stuff you have, or haven't yet, and you can teach them.
Right. Totally. Totally. Well, I want to tell the audience, we have gotten a good amount of questions before the webinar and then during as well. So I wanted to remind the audience that, but before we dive into audience questions, I'm just curious, like, Noel, what are you most looking forward to on the horizon as you see things changing in the regulation space, as you now, I know you have like your community of sustainability folks around you, like what is most exciting to you as you look forward?
I mean, the thing that has always excited me about this space is just the level of innovation. And particularly if you live in the US, with the IRA coming into force, you see an incredible amount of money flowing into really interesting solutions, technologies that could potentially all change the way that we live, which is really, really exciting. And I think from a pragmatic standpoint, regulation is largely intended to provide a level playing field from an information standpoint. I mean, that's the general premise of what a lot of these regulations are aiming at. And so I think that's a really good thing, right? Because historically, it's been whoever's comms team could put together the most compelling impact report, which is a comms tool, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we're just in a very different place now. So I think that the ability to evaluate people on a generally level playing field is really cool, and I think we'll create progress. That's the point. And I think the level of innovation, just because we've really kind of changed our perspective and collectively really see this as a priority, it's really cool. If you just take 15 minutes and Google clean tech, sustainable innovations, there's some amazing things out there. Some of them will never see the light of day, but some of them will, and they'll be fantastically transformational.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a partner of ours, Charm Industrial, is doing basically carbon removal. And again, I'm new to this space. So we went to their site here in San Francisco, and just seeing the innovation on their side was also amazing. And, you know, I think that it's also really encouraging to have a lot of folks focused on something that does really matter for not just business innovation, but, you know, collectively our world and our planet. So agree with you totally on that. Okay, we have some questions here, Noel, in the Q&A area and the chat, and then I got some in our survey thingy before. So I'm going to start with the first one. The anonymous attendee says, what would you say to companies who are waiting till they really have to do it regarding sustainability efforts? Many companies aren't directly impacted by regulations. And then kind of separate to that, how do you quantify or explain the ROI benefits of implementing a sustainability strategy?
Yeah, no, I read that question too. It's a great question. You know, look, I think that there's a continuum of companies when it comes to sustainability. You have a small percentage on the right-hand end of that spectrum that, you know, have been committed for a long time, fundamentally believe it's the right thing to do, and have committed resources to solve for it. You have a big chunk in the middle who think that they need to do something, but maybe don't have the capabilities. And I expect that there's a fair number of people on this call like that. And then you do have a tail where companies are like, I'm not doing anything until I absolutely have to. You know, that's a philosophical approach that you can't really change, right? That comes down to, what do you as a company, and more specifically your executive leadership and your board, care about? And if they don't care, you can't force them to care. If caring is, well, we'll comply with regulations, then that's the extent of it, and that's got to be okay, right? You can't force a complete shift in priorities, and there are lots of reasons that companies go down that path. Some are in financial distress, some just philosophically don't agree with it, some are denying climate change. That's a hard thing to tackle. So if that's the place that you're at, probably want to evaluate whether or not that aligns with your personal priorities. In terms of the second aspect of the question, how do you quantify, explain the ROI benefits? What I would do is focus on those intersections of incentive. And I'll give you a really specific example. I mentioned the story about aligning on waste, but things like air freight. In a lot of industries, they use air freight almost exclusively. In some industries, they use it when they have to hurry something to market. There's a way to manage your planning space so that you minimize that. And in the case of footwear and apparel, air freight is significantly, like 40 times more carbon intensive than putting something on a boat. It's also significantly more expensive, like orders of magnitude more expensive. So those are the places that I would start, is where you can show a definitive quantitative financial benefit to being more sustainable, particularly if you're having a hard time kind of with that philosophical alignment. Start in the places where you make more money. That's really the things that sell themselves.
Yep. And going back to what you were saying in the beginning is like, you also got to ask the questions to understand where you can get those financial gains. So it will take time, like you said, it's going to be hard. It's not easy, like, hey, I'm going to show you this number and everyone's going to care about sustainability all of a sudden.
Right.
But
yeah, and I would say resist the temptation to say, you just don't get it. Of course this is important. Well, it is, but not everybody feels that way. So sometimes you got to meet people where they are.
Right, exactly. Okay, so Rebecca, thank you for asking this question. What tips, advice do you have for those of us who are sustainability professionals as we enter industries we have not worked in before, to most effectively drive those conversations by using industry or business specific acumen of those industries they're entering?
I want to make sure I understand the question, reading it too. Without being frozen by imposter syndrome. Well, hey, look, we all have imposter syndrome from time to time. Look, I really think this is about being curious. Look, there's no question. And there are plenty of times in my career, even at the company that I knew really, really well, where I entered a space that I didn't understand particularly well. When I moved to Vietnam to be the general manager of manufacturing, that was a massive imposter syndrome moment for me. And it really is about asking questions, understanding. You don't have to have all the answers at the outset. And I think you'll generate a lot more credibility if you do ask those questions. And it's okay to ask questions. That's how you learn. There's no harm in taking a moment or 90 days or however long it takes you to really understand how the company operates. It took me 25 years, well, let's say 20, to get to the point where I felt like I could be an effective CSO, because I knew enough different functions and how they interrelated to each other to start to drive change. Not everybody has that luxury or that amount of time, but take the time you need to really understand the levers of the new industry that you're in, and hopefully have some fun along the way.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Next question, I might actually suggest, I know it's an anonymous attendee, but follow up with us after that. We would be happy to talk you through this around what frameworks, SBTI, et cetera, that you could use for your report on top customers. I think that's very much within our wheelhouse to help you with. And then Alan, good to see you, Alan. How can you network with sustainability peers? What sort of events or forums do you attend, Noel?
Oh, good question. Well, a lot of them were industry specific. So I would go to the Copenhagen Fashion Summit, which is kind of a big green fashion event. So there will be industry specific fora. Climate Week is a great place to go. And primarily, and you have Climate Week in San Francisco, there's one in New York. There are things like Green Biz, which is a big conference that happens every year. Those are great because you get wide exposure to a number of industries. I think the risk that we all run as sustainability professionals is to live in our own little echo chamber. I was fortunate enough to sit on the New York Stock Exchange Sustainability Advisory Council. And one of the cool things about that was I was sitting next to the CSO of Chevron, of Travelers Insurance, of Visa, and they all have really different challenges. In a lot of ways, the same challenges, but you really were able to kind of understand how different industries were tackling different problems and how intractable some of those problems really were. So in some ways, it made me feel better about my own situation. But I think, you know, the big ones, Climate Week, super helpful. You can spend an entire week going to a number of different sessions that will really provide a lot of context. And then I think dig in a little bit for an industry specific one or two that can help you learn more specifically about your industry. And again, for us, it was really Copenhagen Fashion Week, Copenhagen Fashion Summit, among others.
Yeah, yeah, agree with the industry specific sort of associations and groups we've seen a lot of success in. I will also just plug the Green Places team kind of is all over the US doing these small informal dinners and happy hours, and it's a great chance for you in that local area to just get to know the folks around you. So we have one in New York tonight, we have Dallas and Seattle next week. So, you know, we definitely would love to help build the community around sustainability folks where it is valuable to you all around best practices and sharing. Okay, so let's see. We are struggling with developing strategies around building efficiency measures, EV charging program, etc., due to a constantly changing site strategy. Have you encountered this in your career, and what would your recommendation be to navigate this?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Yeah, I read that one ahead of time. I wish I had a silver bullet for you. You know, look, you can have a great sustainability strategy, but it's always contingent on the business strategy. And so if you're getting whipsawed by the business strategy, I think you have to be realistic with your peers and some of your senior leaders. Like, hey, look, you know, we're dependent on what you guys do from a business strategy standpoint. And this actually happened at Nike, where a change in business strategy or a change in financial objective directly impacted the sustainability strategy, and frankly, in a negative way. And so there were, it is what it is. And I see Chloe's question down below. Hi, Chloe. Nice to see your name in the chat. It's challenging, right? And part of your job as a senior sustainability leader is to be dispassionate about it, right? It's a super passionate subject. People get really emotional about it, as well they should. And you're working within the context of a business that's got a multitude of other priorities. And so I think you have to be somewhat dispassionate about the impact of the changing strategy on your strategy and articulate what the impact is going to be. And hopefully that creates a little more stability, but it may not. Unfortunately, there are lots of companies out there that whipsaw their strategies far more than they should. And that's bad for the business as a whole. And of course, on the sustainability side. So I don't have a great answer for you. I don't have a super encouraging answer other than to say, be clear on what the impact is going to be supportive of the business strategy overall, but help the team understand that if X, then Y. If you do this, or if we don't have clarity here, we won't be able to execute this, or maybe more specifically, it will negatively impact what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and maybe part of the answer there too for this question is like, you're not alone in feeling that way. Certainly, you know, we've all been there, whether it's, you know, with sustaining Noel's career at Nike and sustainability, or, you know, me over here in my B2B marketing career. It's you know, challenging, and I don't think there is a silver bullet in any of those.
Totally, unless you're the CEO,
right?
Nobody's immune to this.
Right,
and,
exactly.
and even the CEO is it because they have a board they report to.
Yes, true. Let's see, anything additional on Chloe's question, Noel?
So Chloe and I know each other from a while ago, so it's great to see
Oh,
you.
okay.
No, I mean, I think that it's a really good question. I think you have to have a sense that you are part of a larger machine, and that's got to be okay. Businesses are not nonprofits, and I think that especially now, when expectations are changing, when regulatory requirements are so much more rigid than they have been in the past, I mean, they've been non-existent in the past, sustainability will naturally become part of the rhythm of the business in a way that it never has before. But that there are a lot of people who feel like that will make it less important, that it just becomes a reporting thing. I actually disagree with that, and I think it's an entry point to make it more of a part of the fabric of the business. But again, I think the trick, Chloe, is to really understand what your peers are incentivized for. What is their job, and how do you find the places where you can help them be better at what they're doing so that they can help you achieve more in what you're trying to do. It's a gross oversimplification, I get it, but trust me, it was really useful for me.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so I didn't want to miss one in the chat. So Dan says, I'm all in for external comms of best practices, but it is very competitive, which is true. Can you speak more to the competitive advantages brought on through sustainable performance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I still believe that there's some aspects of this that are pre-competitive, but you're right. There's in some cases it will be competitive, and I think you referenced this earlier, Kristen, when you said that as part of an RFP, for example, you have to disclose your reporting capability, what's your sustainability strategy, how mature are you, you know, what kind of the performance management things we talked about before. I think that's where it becomes competitive. When you have companies that are looking for suppliers or vendors who are more mature in this space. And so to the best of your ability to highlight your maturity and your capability, I do think will more and more become a competitive advantage. Especially as big companies like the ones we mentioned before have increased expectations and have to change their reporting regimes to comply with regulatory environments in the EU in particular. So that's where I really see it, is when you're competing against somebody else for business and there are specific questions about your sustainability capability and the reporting that comes with it.
Yeah, agree. And I know you touched on this earlier, Noel. I think it's, you know, competing for consumers, for business, and then also for prospective employees. Like, you know, I think there's a ton of research out there, and my old employer included, around Gen Z just being like that being one of the top factors that younger professionals are looking at when they look for their first and second job is, you know, does this company have a mission? Are they aligned? You know, are they actually doing the things that serve their mission? And even more, like a click down in climate, like purpose-driven climate. Do companies have a stance there? So I think it's, you know, competitive across those first two vectors, and also with building your org too. And there's a lot of talent out there right now, as we all know.
That's right. Yeah, and I don't know if you're planning on tackling this last question because it's a great segue.
Yes, let's.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fantastic question, because you get to the heart of what the challenge is with science-based targets for any company. You particularly when you get to scope 3, you're in a space where you don't control a lot of the outcomes, and I think, you know, like you said, even if you did manufacture things, it's hard to make a dent in your scope 3, because at least in the footwear and apparel sector, it's driven by things like power grids in Vietnam. Well, Nike's a big company with a big voice, but it doesn't control infrastructure in developing countries. And so I think the thing is you have to be really realistic as you do your analysis, as you set your strategy. What are the things that drive your carbon footprint? What are the things that you actually have influence over? And what are the things that are completely outside of your control? And in that space where you don't control the outcomes, how much influence do you want to try to have over those? You know, do you want to try to have a voice into that? Do you want to create or lean into an industry consortium that's trying to have influence over that? At the end of the day, scope 3 is super challenging, primarily because by definition, you don't control the outcomes there. And so as a company, you have to make a choice. How willing are you to commit to outcomes in that space, knowing that it's effectively an influencing campaign to get there? And I would recommend that if you do set an SBTI, you go in eyes wide open, that scope 1 and scope 2, you should have a very clear plan as to what you can do to solve for that, and be committed from a resource standpoint to get there. And also go in eyes wide open that scope 3 will be much more challenging, and pick the 2 or 3 things that you want to try to influence the outcomes in your scope 3. But know that, particularly as you have to show your homework, as I've said, in the reporting space, be clear with the world that X, Y, and Z have to be true in order for us to achieve our scope 3 goals. I think that companies will have a choice. Do we run away from those kinds of commitments because we don't think we can control the outcomes? Or are we committed philosophically as an organization to try to drive some change in that space, even if we know that we don't hold the levers?
Yep, awesome. Noel, I think one last question for you there. So there was maybe a fun one. There was some hype internally at Green Places around this webinar and getting to chat with you. So would love to know, how was sustainability integrated in, like, you know, the actual Nike shoes, or you know, and which ones specifically, and then what was the consumer reaction to that?
Well, it's interesting. There was always a bit of a bifurcated approach. The very first like sustainable shoe that we did was something called Space Hippie. And if you're not familiar with it, Google it, look at the YouTube video. It's a fascinating story. Some really creative designers in the innovation space came up with this. And basically the premise was they gave themselves the brief to do the lowest carbon shoe that we had ever done, and quickly found out that it needed to be made out of recycled material. It looks recycled by design. So that was kind of the first one where we went, hey, we're going to show the world. We thought it would be, kind of a niche thing. I still see them today. I've seen them. I've talked to people in medical offices who wear them and say, oh yeah, no, I wear them because they're the most comfortable shoes I've ever had. And they're very chunky, like they have a really specific aesthetic. But what's interesting is that the top of the pyramid innovation actually doesn't drive impact at scale. It's really a great way to communicate to consumers if you're a product company. But what really drives impact at scale is when you substitute things like linings or specific materials in shoes or garments that are really big volume. Consumers may not actually even see the difference, which is great. And it won't appear as though it's more sustainable. But those are the things that really start to drive down a carbon footprint of a product line, because you're doing it across so many different units. So if you have a shoe that's 300,000 units, looks cool, very innovative, great. It kind of stimulates the notion of what's possible with the consumer. And then you've got a shoe that's 10 million units that still looks like it's the previous iteration, but you've made a change in the materials, can actually have a far greater impact than that previous example.
Awesome. I love it. And yes, do know the Space Hippie. You guys should all Google it. I think it's so fun to hear, stories like that. And the team was very interested as well. Well, Noel, we are coming up on time here. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing all of your advice, tips, your experience with this crowd. I think, messages that came through loud and clear to me were really aligning with incentives, understanding there's that AI always gets me on Zoom. Aligning with the incentives of your business leaders, trying to understand what matters to them, starting to talk to the people who have impact and influence within the company, namely it's someone in the financial office and the legal office. And I think really, start small, start with what is your commitment, start measuring, because 2026 is truly not that far away at this point in time.
Absolutely right. Don't forget, as a sustainability professional, you are an enterprise leader, and there are lots of obligations that come with that. And you have to learn, if you don't already, how to operate as an enterprise leader. You're not just driving change in the sustainability space, you are helping the company change. And that's a really different perspective.
Definitely agree. And I will just say, for anyone on the line who needs help with this, who needs help thinking through this at their organization, we joke, Noel and I have joked about calling Green Places a chief sustainability officer in a box. We are happy to help with that. And luckily, we have gotten to mine Noel's brain for many months now too, and would be happy to chat with you all if you're struggling on where to get started and how.
Thanks, Rebecca, or thanks everybody. Thank you, Kristen. It was super fun. Good luck to everybody in your journey.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.